Hi, everybody. This is Luiz Maia, and here we are recording another session for our course, The Behavioral Economics of Global Affairs. So, our topic for today is still nudge. Nudge, as we translate it to Portuguese, we call it empurrãozinho, right? Something that will help people making better decisions for themselves. Okay, so we are talking about an attempt to help people make good decisions, and we have started talking about those things, but today we're gonna spend some more time to understand how these things work, and actually we are also gonna understand how the opposite of nudge works, right? So there is like the good nudge, aquelas intervenções que são favoráveis e ajudam as pessoas a tomarem boas decisões. But we will also talk about sludge. Sludge, as we translate it to Portuguese, would be barreira ou lama ou alguma coisa que obstrução, okay? And so we're going to talk about how we can prevent people from making good choices too. Okay? All right, so here we go. Let me remind you that in this class, we first talked about marketing techniques to persuade people in order to make them purchasing some stuff, right? So we talk about reciprocity, we talk about scarcity, authority, consistency, affect, and conformity or consensus building, right? So those are techniques that marketeers have been used for a very long time in order to persuade consumers and make larger sales, okay? So those are somehow psychological tricks. They work, and we have to be aware of them. We discussed some of them. We talked about how they are essentially present in everyone's days, right? We throughout our days, our common days, we are gonna see persuasion in operation all the time, right? Not only in supermarkets, but all advertising. So, okay, this is what we talk about persuasion. We actually had some time in class to discuss persuasion in organizations, how people, when they are negotiating contracts, when they are hiring someone, or when they are trying just to plan for some sort of end of year event, which kind of gifts they will distribute at those occasions. So we talk a little bit about how persuasion has actually invaded many times the operation of companies and all sorts of organizations too. Okay? Now, we want to differentiate what those are and compare them with nudge. So, nudge are aspects of choice architecture that tend to alter people's behavior in a predictable way, but without limiting any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. So if I tell you, come over here and watch this film, if you do, I'm going to give you $200. This is not a nudge, okay? I'm purchasing your time. We can give all sorts of name for that. I'm bribing you, or I don't know. This is not exactly nudge. Nudge, most of the times, they are transparent. You can see what is going on. And what we are trying to do here is to help people making better choices for themselves. Okay? So this is the good point. We want to emphasize that. And we actually discussed a little bit about that. So what is our context here? Well, first of all, we have to realize that decision-making processes, well, they are much more complicated than we economists have assumed for a long time, okay? any decision we make, well, each of those involves a lot of possible aspects, right? We have contextual factors like choice architecture, which we will talk mostly here, some biases, some salience, how highlighted some aspects of the thing is. But we also have social factors. When we make choices, we tend to compare what other people are doing in order to make a decision. We tend to trust someone's opinion many times. We take into consideration lots of emotional aspects too. All right. And we also have some individual factors, like how a person is at that very moment, how careful she or he is, how much susceptible to some kind of cognitive biases they are personally, and how strict they are in trying to be consistent, in trying to uh, make those options perfectly in accordance to their identities, right? Okay, so decision making is a big thing. It's a big topic, and we have lots and lots of factors playing some role at those. But when we discuss nudge, we try to move to a very specific bandwidth of decision making. We try to be straight, direct, and be as honest and clear as possible, saying, I'm trying to help you. This is obvious. I'm not doing this for my own sake. I'm thinking about you. All right? So we discussed in class a number of those situations. We talked about men's rooms, how we try to convince people to be more careful when they are going to the restroom. We talked about smokers in public ways. They should be a little bit more careful on what they throw at the floor. And then we can have like easy and funny and light ways to convince people to participate, to help out and not throwing stuff away and not making uh, our streets so dirty. All right. We also discussed a little bit about how we help people to introduce more movements in their days so that they will actually have like better health, and there are lots of those. We in a time of pandemics, there are no and there's not enough ways that we can. There are not enough ways that we can try and help people to keep their hands clean, not only with washing their hands, but using alcohol or things like that. And we understand that some tricks that are used in restaurants, we can kind of invert them and take them to our own house, right? So I mentioned to you how I have personally decided to keep smaller plates in my home, and it does work, right? I mean, I'm doing that for myself, and that helps me trying to keep healthier habits, healthier eating. We discuss when that sometimes nudges go stray, they go too far, right? I mean, with this image right in front of you there, you can see a plastic bag. You can understand the message. I mean, we should be more careful and use less plastic bags. But with that image, which is a strong one, it resembles some sort of violent um, act. So this thing is kind of going too far. And in that case, we have to consider nudges from this ethical perspective. And that's what led us to ask the question, how far can you go in order to help people making better choice? So uh, we found this a work of Brian Higginsball, How to Nudge Ethically. And I wanted to take a few more minutes with you to talk about those, okay? All right, so what are the key points in trying to nudge ethically? Well, first, we have to think about autonomy. So we don't want to substitute people's ability to make good choices. We have to think about safety and all sort of perspectives, right? We don't want to cause harm. We don't want to cause any trouble to people. Actually, we are trying to help them. And you have to think more broadly about welfare, right? As long as we are increasing autonomy, safety, and welfare, we are good to go. All right, that's easier to say than to do. But then again, let's take a look at the components of nudge. So if we are going on the right way, we are going up in that sign over there. We are trying to increase autonomy, safety, and welfare. Uh, the purpose of nudge can be to reduce market failures. Now let's remember here that we all agree that markets are good ways to organize society. But we know that markets will fail predictably in very specific circumstances. So we have to be aware of that. And one possible way out of market failure is to nudge people to do the right thing, right? We want to decrease fraud decision making. We want to help people make decisions deliberately and in perfect alignment with their own interests. And we want to limit the harm of the status quo. Now, notice this, okay? Status quo is our tendency to like things staying the same, right? So we're going to talk about those when we discuss sludge, okay? On the other hand, if you are decreasing autonomy, safety, and welfare, we are more concerned about benefits to only the nudger. So the person designing the nudge is the one getting the benefits. So this is not ethical, right? So we are going down in that case. And if we overall assume this paternalistic influence in which we think we should make decision for someone else, well, then again, we are decreasing autonomy. All right, so this is the first aspect. Second one, incentives. So nudges are the nudgee, the person receiving the nudge, is able to benefit, obviously, and that is aligned. There's this alignment between the nudgee and the nudger. So the one designing the nudge and the one participating, receiving the effects of the nudge. So if their interests are aligned, that is good, right? We are trying to make things that will help out everybody. Now, on the other hand, if nudges material incentives are replaced, yes, apparently we are going too far, right? If we uh, convince people to do the right thing, not because of the right reasons, but because we give them money or I don't know, we give them status or things like that, we have to be careful, right? If we substitute their natural incentives to artificial ones, then we may be going too far, right? And the final one, the misalignment between nudgee and nudger, right? This is obvious. If my purpose is to help myself, not someone else's, well, obviously I'm not behaving ethically, as at least most of the times. Okay. All right. The third one, the mechanisms of nudge. We have to seek to educate people sometimes to help them realize stuff that they don't easily perceive. We have to allow for free optional participation. Uh, we can invite people to pause and think about uh, issues before they make decisions. That is a way to help them. We should try to operate by limiting biases. So we understand that it is from our human perspective that we are susceptible to biases, right? So we have to try and help people out of their own biases. Okay. On the other hand, if you are nudging unethically, then you do not seek to educate, you establish automatic participation, and it looks like people don't have a choice. People have a hard time to stop, to avoid participation, and we tend to operate upon their biases. Now, take a look at these four issues here concerning the mechanisms of unethical nudge. Okay? Does not seek to educate, automatic participation, unable to pause, to stop, and to think carefully about one thing, and promoting biases rather than helping people out of their own biases. Okay, so pay attention to those because we're going to go back to them as we discuss sludges. Okay, all right, and the fourth element here are the qualities of nudges, right? So they should be transparent. People can immediately identify that something is going on there. So someone has tried to intervene and to help you out. That should be clear. It should not be like hidden. Um, we should try and be as honest as possible and say, here's what we are doing. This is why we are doing. If you want to talk to us, here we are, or something like this. And the whole process should not be harmful at all, at any circumstances, right? And on the other hand, you could have the opposite characteristics. If it is non-transparent, if it is misleading or untrue, and if it poses any kind of harm to people participating, then we are not on the right track. Okay? All right, so you can see that something that looks like pretty easy and intuitive like this, let me go back there. This thing seems like genius, right? But if you pay attention to this, you have to realize that this is very carefully designed, okay? This is not something that happens all of a sudden. People have to actually design these sorts of intervention so that they will have all the good qualities that we discussed here in this diagram, okay? You don't get all this positive perspective just by having an idea. You have to test, you have to think through, you have sometimes to have focal groups to see how people will react to some sort of intervention before you move on and try and implementing them. Okay? Now let's talk a little bit about the opposite of nudge, which is the sludge. Check out this guy's face here. He looks pretty mad. I don't know, some younger people may not even realize what we are talking about here. This is a telephone, one of the old ones, and many times when we try to cancel subscriptions over the phone, we have a very hard time, right? There is this sketch from Porta dos Fundos, and the guy is trying to cancel his cell phone subscription, and it became famous. It was like a very funny sketch. You can have a look at those later. But then again, the two defining characteristics of a sludge are friction, intentionally posed, right? You create some sort of obstacle deliberately with a bad intention, right? So this is like the evil side of behavioral economics. This is not what we are trying here to teach you to do. We actually want you to perceive, to realize that many times people deliberately impose some of those obstacles and they actually take away our good capacity to make choices. Okay? So Richard Thaler strongly advocates in nudge for good, but making desirable behavior easier, and Sludge does quite the opposite. It makes a process more difficult in order to arrive at an outcome that is not in the best interest of the individual, right? So we are harming people deliberately. Sometimes it's not a physical harm, sometimes it's not a huge financial loss, but yeah, we are doing is avoiding people's good sense, good decision making. Okay. Uh, Examples of sludge, well, they are all over, and we're going to discuss many of them here. But product rebates that require difficult procedures, this may not be immediately clear to Brazilian students. So I'm going to try and explain to you in English, then I'm going to make a quick description in Portuguese, okay? Product rebates works like this. You purchase a cell phone and you pay $1,000 for this cell phone. But once you get home, if you take a picture of the the receipt, and you fill out some forms, and then you take this envelope, put everything inside, you stamp it, you write the right address, and you send it by mail. 45 days later, you get some of your money back. So you paid $1,000 for this, but maybe 45, 60 days later, if you do all of those uh, steps, if you follow all those steps indicated, you get some of your money back. So when they sell this, they say $900 after rebates. So they can announce it that you're only going to have to pay $900 for it only if you go through all the steps and wait 60, 90 days. All right. But they can say it is $900. It's not $1,000, right? So sometimes people do that and they create very hard to follow steps or very long periods. So at some point, people will just give up. They say, you know what? It didn't work. I will not go through all of those. Okay. So if you create too difficult procedures so that people can get their money back, then we're talking about the sludge. Em português, bom, lá nos Estados Unidos é muito comum essa ideia de rebate. Você compra um produto por $1.000, você paga $1.000, mas no anúncio já vem dizendo assim: esse produto custa $900 depois dos rebates, do rebatimento. O rebatimento, na verdade, é depois de pagar $1.000, você tem que preencher formulário, tem que tirar foto do código de barra, tem que colocar no envelope, mandar para o correio, esperar 60 dias e tal. Aí você recebe um cheque de $100 de volta. Isso permite que eles anunciem o celular por 900, mas você só vai pagar 900 depois de fazer um monte de passos, de seguir um monte de instruções. Então, muita gente não consegue ir até o final e acaba tendo pago já os $1.000. Okay? All right. Subscription cancellation, it's kind of easy, right? Everybody knows how it works, right? If you If you call a bank and you want to close your account, they are going to ask you for some documents. They are going to tell you that they can't do that over the phone. You have to go to the bank physically, talk to the manager. You're going to have to fill out a number of forms. And sometimes you're going to have to take responsibility for eventual checks that can be written after the account was closed. So they make they make it very difficult for you to cancel your account. Many people will just abandon their account and later they figure out that they have to pay some fee. It's all contractual and it ends up being a pain in the neck for many people, right? So subscription cancellation of many types of services, those are very common, and the companies make it harder and harder for you to cancel a subscription that is deliberate. I mean, they know what they are doing. They're trying to avoid losing a client, even though the client may be like a very reluctant one and someone that will badmouth the company. Sometimes it's still good because you are paying. For them, it's not a big deal. So this is one of a very common situation. And we in Brazil, we have also to talk about how hard it is to access public services, right? Governmental services. Many times people will just give up. They say, "Oh, come on, if I depend on the government, it's never going to go through." So you have to present a number of papers. Sometimes you have to present papers that the government itself issued. So you go to Detran and you have to present your driver's license to Detran, I mean, to our traffic department. So it's absurd, right? I mean, if these guys were the one issuing emitting those documents, they should know you, right? They should know who you are. If you tell your number, they should look at your picture there in their files and say, all right, this is Luiz. They shouldn't ask you for a document that themselves have emitted, right? They have created. So the government is many times like this in Brazil, and sometimes people will just give up. They say, no, I prefer to purchase it from a private company. It's just too hard to access some sort of public service, right? So even when a sludge is associated with beneficial behavior, like for example, even if you are trying to avoid corruption, well, that's a good point, right? If you try to avoid corruption, you are well intentioned, but sometimes you can create such harassment, such forms of restriction that the benefit may not overcome the costs. So you can create excessive costs in order to obtain some sort of gain, even if that is a socially approved gain, right? So the cost may be difficulty in acquiring information, unnecessary amounts of time spent, or psychological detriments such as frustration, right? Frustration. You can harm people's good intention and actually block their options, prevent them from making some choices by creating difficulties, okay? Unfortunately, that's the most common thing in Brazilian governments. Now, just to be sure we are all understanding what's going on here, right? Well-designed sludges, the evil nudge, né? Right? They are deliberately built on cognitive biases. So people, when they create those processes, when they establish certain protocols, they know they are gonna stop you. They know how to do that. They can use framing effect, which means they can change words. They can convince you that if you do something, you're gonna be called a quitter, or I don't know, late decision maker or something like that. Some sort of name or expression full of negativity, okay? And that somehow may give you some discomfort. They know we tend to calculate poorly how long things will take in the future. So they build upon planning fallacy. They know that many times we are in a hurry. We want to make things quick, and they say, "Oh, no, 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 no. In order to cancel this service, you're going to have to submit this paper. You're going to have to wait 60 days. Then you're going to have to show up at some office, and then you're going to..." So you got the ideas, right? And uh, if we are inclined to susceptible to present bias, we care about now. So we will tend to procrastinate those procedures and say, "Oh yeah, next week I will stop by," or something like that, right? They also rely on our tendency to overweight small probabilities. So they say, "Oh, you see, we can reduce your payment and you will use only occasionally if you want. You don't want to give up that option," or things like that. So sometimes, even when you know that your chances of using that resource or service is very small, the probability of using is very small, still they say, "Oh, come on, keep your right to use this resource," or something like this. And they know we all have status quo bias, right? We want things to stay the same. We don't feel comfortable when things are changing too much, too frequently, right? So uh, sludges are built upon loss aversion too. They say, "Are you sure that you will never gonna need our service? Because if you do, to reestablish this connection, you're gonna have to pay all over again the initial fees and things like that." So this is trying to appeal to your loss aversion, right? And also, many times they uh, observe that they can simply give you too much information and you're not going to read it through, right? So the classical example is like when you're trying to cancel subscriptions, either to your cell phone or, I don't know, some sort of services that you can hire very easily. But sometimes what we do, and we do that incredibly often, we just accept to terms of services that we don't read. Come on, guys. How many times over the last 30 days have you clicked to a button like this saying, "Yeah, I accept the terms and conditions," without even having a look at those, right? So they know it is a lot of things to read. That's not accidental. Some of it is obviously is necessary. You have like legal information that you are supposed to provide, but then they want to make it as long as possible. So you're gonna feel like, "Oh, I have to move on. I have to start using this service right away. So I'm just gonna accept here, and maybe sometime later I will go back and read to what I have accepted in that deal." Okay. So once again, you avoid people's best behavior. You avoid people uh, common sense or best choice for themselves, right? So this is what sludge is all about. As a homework, I would like to invite you guys to take a look at this video. You have here some Harvard student talking to the Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler, right? This is a very famous guy, and he goes over some of these discussions in quite a funny way. He describes the history of the book, on how they came upon those issues, and how they decided that it was important to have a second edition of the book, mostly to bring up the issues of sludge. Okay, so please have a look at this interview. It's quite good, and I will stop by here and hope to see you guys soon. All right, thanks everybody. I'll see you next time.